Thank you, Kristen and Kim, for inviting me today. I appreciate the opportunity to present our mobile marketing technology solutions for the Cannabis Alliance folks. A little bit about me. I'm 30 years in marketing, 15 years in advertising production. I started out as an industrial photographer, trained in New York City, and I photographed factories all over the country for 15 years or so, creating annual reports and catalogs and ads for technical publications and the like. And then in 1985, moved to the Seattle area and began working as a photographer in a commercial studio. For you folks that might know, Frederick and Nelson, that was our big account doing photography for those type of products. And then in 1985, bought a computer, or 1987, I believe it, bought a computer, and next thing you know, I'm working for a Macintosh hardware startup, doing the marketing for that small company. And in 1995, recruited by Microsoft at a trade show, and then worked a decade or so with them, marketing technology services and some technology software products as well. So I got to the end of my career there, and then in 2010, thinking we might retire, we actually started a small business serving small companies, building apps and mobile marketing solutions for small businesses. Our other business besides cannabis is the pet services industry, where we build apps for them and so forth. And I might refer and talk to that in a moment. But let me get started with the slide deck here. Let's share my screen. Go. So the presentation I put together here is a little bit of what we've observed in the cannabis industry and how the different marketing disciplines have been used and so forth. So when you look at this list, it's not just one thing that is involved in marketing a product. Brand development, website, search engine, programmatic advertising, which I'll get into in detail, display advertising, loyalty programs, all these different pieces build a marketing program for you. And I'm going to cover a few in detail, but many in just, maybe one bullet or so. I've got about 8 or 10 slides that speak to each of these different disciplines and what's important. Now, what's great about the internet today is that a lot of the research for marketing has been done by small companies or research companies that put their research online and easy to find. So I've used a lot of their resources to show you how these different disciplines would work in marketing cannabis. First of all, digital media and cannabis marketing restrictions are significant for this industry. As you know, Bing and Google don't allow you to buy AdWords, so that if you do a search, you can actually be in the 6-pack, or what's now the 2-pack at the top. Instagram and Facebook have very limited promotion activity. The broadcast mediums, radio, television, of course not. And a lot of internet networks don't allow cannabis advertising. I work with 6 specific ad networks that allow me to run cannabis ads. Then again, app stores. The Apple and the Google app stores don't allow you to build apps. Now, there are some apps that have been grandfathered in, and we actually were working with a company in Washington State where we built them a cannabis app, and then it got pushed back by Apple, and then we built them a progressive web app, which is usable but doesn't have all the features of an app, which is very important, and I could go into that if you have any questions. Next, Washington State, of course, has all their restrictions. And you've all seen these many different restrictions, from the spinners to images without cannabis leaf, and consumers, and the giveaways and promos, and limitations on what is free or donated and so forth. And you're all aware of these details, but it is a restriction when it comes to defining a full scope of cannabis or cannabis marketing. Brand development's a big piece of what I think all retailers and producers are going through right now. It's like not one company has broken away from the pack, if you will, that has a leading brand, if you were to ask consumers. This is a report, or actually a study done by a vertical cannabis company in California called NorCal Cannabis. And they have a 5-myth report, basically defining some questions about use, access, and so forth. But one of the questions they asked had to do with has any specific brand fallen out yet? And they've come to the conclusion, no. With the fusion of new brands and products, consumers are still seeking brands that they can trust. So there really hasn't been a brand winner yet. And that's important to know that in your marketing efforts, all your competitors are doing the same, trying to be that breakaway brand. And I'll go into a couple other details in that later. So I'm going to jump into 6 of those different disciplines that are really important. As I mentioned, at the bottom of each slide, I've got a link to the resources I used for this. And a lot of this data has been primarily gathered in the last 2 to 3 years. Some of it's new this year, and there's some that goes back a couple of years. But in the case of your website, 90% of buyers who had an excellent mobile experience would buy from the same vendor again. This is really important. Again, my emphasis on mobile. Mobile devices are how we as consumers do everything. It's from searching for something online or location or restaurant, but also in reading content. If you have favorite publications you follow, The Guardian or News or Time or Newsweek, those different publications. So those are places that people spend their time. Next, your search engine optimization. 61% of mobile searchers are more likely to contact a local business if they had a mobile-friendly site. Real important here, if your website is still one that in a mobile view on your smartphone, you have to push it around to find things, that's problematic. People are not going to come back, and it's a lost opportunity for sure. Again, the research here is at that link, and there's a lot of other statistics on what you can do and what you might want to focus on in your search engine, your SEO efforts. It is part of what makes a marketing program work on the internet. Very important to focus on. Next, programmatic advertising. Now that's what I'll focus on in great detail when I get to the end of the slide deck here. I'm just going to pick out a couple things. Again, where all this research came from is at that link at the bottom, but location-based marketing strategies can be 20 times more effective than regular banners. Now I'll speak to that in great deal of detail, granular detail in a moment. But again, because everybody's walking around with a smartphone, there's location data that can be collected, and that data can allow us to say, oh, that person has a specific interest in mind, and I'll go into more detail in a moment. Another part of this, marketers and advertisers are putting 51% of their budget into mobile ads. So think about this. Where are people using their smartphones, and where is the best place to use ads? Because the usage details about consumers today on their mobile devices is quite extensive. Again, this research will show you the number, 60% of consumers click on mobile ads at least weekly. So they're really tracking all the different activity and how important mobile marketing is part of your marketing mix and build your brand. Next, loyalty programs. Now this isn't specific to a mobile device, if you will, but increasing customer retention rates by 5% increases profits over 25 to 95%. And again, everybody knows that having that customer come back again is so important in the success of growing your business. Email promotions, another tool to use in reaching out to people, and more people are using email on their phones, so those programs work well. And then text promotions, that's another one that's important. Again, the link at the bottom will take you to more detail about text promotions and the tools to implement programs like that. And then last, I'm into the detail that I mentioned earlier. So when you think about your smartphone that you carry around each day, there are 2 things going on, or there are 2 IDs that your cell phone puts out when you're walking around. So if you walk into a cannabis store, there's the ad ID for your phone number, your carrier, and your personal information, your PII as we call it, personal identifiable information. And that's what the cell phone companies use. And if the authorities are looking for you, they'll go to the phone company and look for that. And then with location data, they can actually find you live or where you've been as well. So that information is being presented by your phone as you're walking around the cell networks. The other ID is called an advertising ID. That's anonymous. Your name is not tied to that. It basically puts out location data saying, I'm here, and this is my ID number. And I think it's a 10 or 12 digit number that goes into these cell phone records. Now, the smartphone manufacturers and the ad networks created this system about 8 or 10 years ago, in that the ad ID is presented wherever you go, and the ad networks, the people who present the ads and the contacts and so forth, all had to have the system. So they worked together with the phone companies to make all of this happen and make it seamless. So the smartphone user doesn't have to really download anything for us to see that ad ID, because many of the content apps that they have on their phone, everything from The Guardian to USA Today, your weather app, your mapping apps, all those have the ad ID integrated and can present ads. And that ID is then presented to the cell network where you go. So that data is kept by the cell phone companies, believe it or not, for 12 months. And so we're able to go back to the cell phone companies through brokers, or what we call DSPs, data service providers, to obtain that data for programs. Now, next, I want to go into how we take two technologies, the cell phone technology and programmatic advertising platforms, to make all this work. So the geo-targeting allows us to basically locate where people are, and from that determine, yes, that's someone we want to send an ad to. The programmatic advertising platform is a way that all this gets done to get the ad from the advertiser to the consumer. And I'll show in detail in a few graphics to show how all this gets done. So in the case of the cell phone networks, step one, cell phone providers capture the data, and using a triangulation of 3 cell towers to say this person is located here in this community. And think about this too, that the cell phone companies have collected nearly 1 trillion gigabytes of data that they save each year, and that are accessible through our data service providers, the DSPs. And then we basically say, okay, I want the people that were in this parameter here. If you're looking to the lower right image there, you'll see a turquoise color, what we call a polygon, and a red perimeter. So that's the top of a building, actually. So that's a building in Palm Springs that when somebody walks into that building, we gather the information, the ad ID information from that individual. We know that's a cannabis user because they've walked into that building. All this data here on the right, this is the lat long coordinates that create that polygon. So when we go to the data provider, we give them this, it's an equation per se, that basically says we want all the data that's inside that red perimeter. Next, we then basically take the data from the service provider, put it into a database, and we're basically saying, okay, all the people in there for a period of time. So I usually go back 6 to 12 months and gather the data from all the devices that have gone in and out of that facility for the last 12 months. Once we have that data in our database, I then go out to the state records and confirm that it is in fact a cannabis business at that location, gather a screen capture of the storefront, if you will. And the purpose for this is that the regulators in California, Oregon, and Washington all required to prove where your data comes from. So I take to them these images, screenshots, and this location data saying, this is the only place that we gather data on cannabis users. And then you can see in this table below here, all the different states and the many different retail locations that we've gathered. We're up to 2,868 different locations. And then each month, I'm able to look back, as I said, on how many different people go in and out of these locations. So let's say in Seattle, Washington, 105 stores in the metro area. On average, 15,000 people to go in and out of cannabis stores with their smartphone every month, and month over month, and I go out to 1.7 million at the end of 12 months. So you can see this is how we gathered the data to create the targeting side of our program. Next is the programmatic, well, no, actually, this is an example of a targeting campaign in the Portland area. So once we've gathered all the data from these, I think it's just about 212 different locations in Portland proper, we then have this spreadsheet and data that are going to be our targets, basically the device targets that we'll begin to send ads. So that's the scope of a campaign there. We can actually do the whole state or small regions and so forth. And I can speak to that in detail with any questions you might put forward. Next, the programmatic advertising process. Now, have you ever been on your phone and you're scrolling through well, this is CNN. You're scrolling through CNN and you get a blank screen that basically says advertisement across the top here, and then it might be gray or sometimes black. And it's basically a second or two before that gets populated with an ad. Well, what's happened there is what we call instant auction bidding. The content provider, CNN in this case, basically sent out to the ad network saying, I have an ad space that I want to sell. They send that ad request, the size and all the parameters that have been defined in the program, out to the ad networks, which I've represented with a cylinder here. There's about 60 ad networks, but like I say, we're only using 6 ad networks in our programs to do this. It goes out and basically says, I have this space and this parameter, basically who it is, where they are, and all those different parameters. And the live auction basically says you're competing against other advertisers wanting to place ads on that same smartphone. So how we determine the price for a program is set around CPM, cost per 1,000 impressions. So in my case, I'm saying let's $6 per 1,000 impressions is my bid. And if we win, the next step would be basically I get to present that ad on the phone. So it's one of these things that happens in almost microseconds. Sometimes those ads are already populated as you're scrolling through, but it's a very dynamic process. There's a specific layer that the ad networks built for this to work. The content on that page is being provided by the servers at CNN, but all the ads are being provided by different ad network servers out there. So with the combination of the targeting and this programmatic advertising process, we're able to put ads right in front of your customer. And these are the tools that we use. Now, I've spoken to Kristen about this, and I often call it data mining, and truly that's what it is. But we've simplified it in a way that basically saying that anybody that goes into a cannabis store is someone we can advertise to, and only to those people. And it's real important for the regulators to know too that we're only sending ads to those individuals. So the tools that we use to manage the program, I have a dashboard that I can utilize to upload and manage the ad impressions and so forth. And then the campaigns are layered. I can actually take a region. So if you want to take the Seattle area or all of Washington State, we can define those into regions and run different ads and measure the performance of an ad. The controls to manage it, we also the bid rates all done from that dashboard, the number of impressions to device per device. So if you run an ad and you want your consumer to see it 6 times, I can set it up that way. Or if you really want to drive attention, you might have them see it more than 12 times a day. We have those variables. And what time of day? Some recent research that was done is that the best time to present ads to millennials and people, cannabis users in that group as well, is from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. in the morning. Think about this, the number of people sitting in front of their television, and when an ad comes on the television, they're on their phone looking at something else. It's basically the ability for us to turn up the volume a little bit at that time when they're searching their mobile device for different things. Now, the reporting and all the different things that we're able to present back to you are represented in tables like this. We're always tracking the CPM. Now, a story on this, the current CPM for cannabis campaigns right now is about 528, and this is a program that I believe is out of Southern California, Palm Springs. And then this was almost into 3 months, or 2.5 months nearly into the program. And nearly have reached 500,000 impressions. And so this is actually a pretty good program. The click-through rate is pretty normal. 0.2 is pretty good for a branding campaign. They don't have any offers in their ads. They're basically trying to build awareness of their location and so forth. So this is typical of the type of report presented each month or week, depending on how you want to do that. And then another report that basically tracks the data day over day, how many impressions, how many clicks, and then of course the cost for that period as well. So we're able to give you feedback. A more in-depth report, we can actually provide where those ads were landing, what type of publications and content providers are showing those ads. So Weed Maps and Leafly and all the time, Newsweek, and all those different publications. We can actually prepare a report to see that. Now, the thing about Weed Maps and Leafly is that they not only sell ads to cannabis producers and dispensaries direct, but they also allow ad networks to place ads on there too. And so if you're running a program with us, geo-targeted, meaning you're only advertising to cannabis users, we can actually help you cut your monthly cost perhaps to Leafly and Weed Maps, only because they for some time have been the only digital platform out there to present this type of service. So, and these are typical ads that we've been running in the Seattle area, and some in California and some in Oregon. This is your what's typical 300 by 250 seen in most content. This is one that actually resides on a tablet or a PC and actually provides the ability. One of the things with our ad networks that we're able to do is, like, if somebody sees an ad on content here, we can actually grab their cookies, and when they go home and they synchronize their phone with their home computer or network, we can then begin to send ads to their PC as well. And then these sites are typical to be found in the Weather Channel and those places in between content. But the most common, 70–80% of the ads are this 300 by. And one of the things we also recommend in our advertising, you'll see many of these are GIFs. They're basically rotating through and telling a story, if you will. And then also that ability that has to provide the disclaimer information. You'll see here, it'll go from the message, sign up for a program, and then the disclaimer. Whereas in California, all they need to present is the license number here. So we can develop ads in different ways, but to draw attention. Having an offer in an ad is very important. You folks might recognize this shop down here. Again, simple, clean colors and so forth. So that's the story. And because we're remote, we're not going to be able to do a Q&A today, but if you have any questions, my contact information's on this slide, and don't hesitate to reach out. Again, Kristen and Kim, thank you for allowing me to present this.